Welcome to Gracefully Graying. I am your host, Attorney Henry Gornbein. Today on Gracefully Graying, I am very pleased to welcome as my guest Elyssa Schmier, who is the Michigan Regional Director of the Anti Defamation League. Elyssa, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure. First of all, why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about who you are and your background?
Sure, of course. So I have about 20 years experience in public policy and political work. I worked in Washington, D.C., and then moved to Michigan about 13 years ago. I've worked for a variety of nonprofit organizations, mainly in the women and children space, working on anti-poverty policy. I've always kind of worked for progressive left organizations. I had previously worked for one Jewish organization called Jewish Council for Public Affairs. And for the last 12 years before taking this position, I worked for a great organization called Moms Rising. But while I was doing work in kind of the organized women's community, pretty early on, even before October 7th, I started to kind of see some shifts that were happening in that space. It was a little bit more buried, a little bit more underground, but there was definitely a feeling as a Jew that this wasn't the most welcoming space. You know, we had things like the Women's March happening and other political movements that were pretty anti-Israel and in general not the most welcoming to Jewish feminists. And then after October 7th, it kind of felt like, the top blew off. And I was experiencing a lot of anti-Semitism on the left and in progressive spaces. You go to a conference and it was, very unwelcoming. There was things that were blatantly said to your face or in your presence. Maybe they didn't realize I was Jewish at the time. So when this position at ADL Michigan came open, I was really excited. It seemed like a great place for me to go. I could use my experience and invest directly into my own community here in Michigan. And so that's kind of what brought me up to this point. I'm not originally from Michigan, but I make my home here now, and this is where I'm raising my family.
Tell us about the functions of the ADL, the Anti Defamation League.
Yes, of course. So the ADL is over 100 years old. We were originally founded with a mission statement to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment to all. So the ADL fights anti-Semitism with a combination of advocacy, legal action, research, and education. We track and analyze trends in extremism and hate. We engage policymakers. We work very closely with law enforcement, from local police forces all the way up to the FBI. We work in schools and universities to spread education around anti-Semitism, Jewish identity, Holocaust education. And we work with communities across the state to push for stronger protections and accountability. We also provide training and resources and support to empower individuals, institutions, workplaces, educators, and law enforcement to recognize, prevent, and respond to anti-Semitism and extremism. We have a number of different centers at the national level. We have the Center, the Center on Extremism, which does all of our research on extremist groups. We track bad actors across the board. And the main goal is to stop them from doing anything violent or taking action on the anti-Semitic and extremist rhetoric that they have. We also have a research center that researches anti-Semitism, the root causes of it, ways to combat it, message test language to make sure that we're getting through to our audiences. So we do a whole lot of work, but the way that I generally think about it is that we're kind of the first responders in the community when there is anti-Semitism and extremism taking place.
And sadly, there's a lot of it. I mean,
Yes.
We're seeing a rise in anti-Semitism both on the right and on the left in our country. What do you see as some of the causes? And I know there are many, but tell us from your perspective, Elyssa.
Yeah. So first, I kind of want to level set when we say that we see a rise in anti-Semitism. I think that it's important to kind of know what that actually looks like, especially here in Michigan. So our most recent data is from 2024. In a couple months, we'll actually be getting the 2025 data through something called our anti-Semitism audit. But for the most recent data, Michigan is the 11th in the nation for anti-Semitism and extremist incidents. So in 2024, we had 252 anti-Semitic incidences that we recorded. Those are acts of harassment, violence, and vandalism. That's, obviously there's a lot more that happens in the space, but that's what we record in terms of anti-Semitic incidents for our audit. So, we're the 10th in the state regarding incidents on college campuses. We're the 5th in the US in terms of targeting Jewish institutions. And we're the 4th in the United States for white supremacist propaganda. So we have a lot going on here in Michigan. And then obviously, as you're saying, like across the country, we've seen a massive increase in anti-Semitism, certainly since October 7th. But, we've kind of been tracking this upward trend since 2019. We've seen, a 344% increase in incidents across that time period, which is the largest recorded increase that the ADL has ever seen in like the almost 50 years that they've been tracking this. So I think that there's a number of reasons that we're seeing this increase, especially across the political spectrums. We see the normalization of anti-Semitic tropes and rhetoric in everyday life. We see it in politics. We see it on regular traditional media, social media, in so-called polite society. It's becoming more and more normalized. I was at a comedy club this past weekend, and the comedian told a number of jokes that definitely probably wouldn't have happened 5 years ago. Definitely anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, playing into anti-Semitic tropes. And some of this is that we see online radicalization and the social media algorithm playing into this. We see political polarization in general. But what that's kind of leading into is the scapegoating of Jews for a number of the issues that are happening in America today. But more so than like the extreme activity that's happening on the left or the right, which is certainly like very pronounced and certainly concerning, our Center on Anti-Semitic Research actually finds that there's much more data regarding younger people in America in terms of an increase in anti-Semitism than among the political extremes. So we're much more concerned about like key drivers that are finding that millennials and Generation Z are more likely to endorse anti-Jewish tropes when they have friends or family who dislike Jews. We've even have data on that, support of Hamas, a clear terrorist organization, would not be a reason for a younger person, someone under the age of 35, to kind of stop being friends with someone or disregard in a social setting someone who shows support for Hamas. So some of the research that we're showing is showing a reversal from the past, that millennials and Gen Z now agree more with anti-Semitic stereotypes than older generations, suggesting that young Americans are increasingly picking up anti-Semitic attitudes. And we're seeing that play out, not just in politics, but in all aspects of society, how our education is being taught, what we see on social media, kind of who is included in social groups, and the ostracization of younger Jews, especially on college campuses.
It's frightening. And it's like almost as if we're saying that as we get further and further from the generation of the Holocaust survivors, that it's almost as if it's I don't know, being pushed under the rug or not emphasized enough. Elyssa, how do we deal with the extreme violence that is happening more and more? I mean, I think I think there was a shooting in Toronto. There the murder of two Jewish people coming out of a synagogue. There was the attack on the governor's house after a Seder in Pennsylvania. I mean, the list goes on, and it's frightening.
Yes, I agree. I mean, I think that the violent explosion that we're seeing, it kind of starts at the normalization of just language and attitudes, right? And this is the classic, ADL has a pyramid of hate, and it talks about how you normalize this language and these activities and these views, and it starts to filter up. And when by the time you get to the top of the pyramid, you're at genocide basically. But right in the middle is violent action, murder, violent acts of violence, attacks, even just like throwing bottles at people, that type of thing when people are marching. This is much more commonplace. I think that what a lot of non-Jews just don't understand is the amount of security and the cost of that security that Jews need to undertake on a daily basis. So, I go and drop my son off at his Jewish preschool. There's an armed guard outside. Most synagogues are basically fortresses at this point. Whenever we have services, there are multiple security guards. We get police units stationed outside, and that's just like on a normal Shabbat. When we start to enter into like high holidays, Purim, which we just had, there's a lot of security that takes place because it's just kind of dangerous these days to walk through life as a recognizable Jew or enter into a Jewish institution of some sort. And I think that most people that don't have to do that on a regular basis, like you don't see the same thing when you enter church services on Sunday. There isn't this mass kind of police and security presence. And I think because of that, there's this feeling of fear and anxiety that happens among the Jewish community in America. I think that there's a lot of pieces that need to be done. There needs to be responsibility from our leadership, at businesses, in politics, across the board to kind of stand up strongly and boldly against the rise in anti-Semitism that they're seeing. A lot of the times we hear, oh, it's complicated, or we don't want to get political. It's not political when someone who's leaving a Jewish museum who is young and vibrant gets shot down. That's not political. That's just violence and disgusting, and it shouldn't be a difficult thing to speak out against. I also think that there's a number of policies that could be passed at the state and national level that help protect our communities. So there's something called the Nonprofit Security Grant. We have it at the federal level. We don't have it at the state level here in Michigan. This is a fund of money that's available to any house of worship, not just Jewish, and any nonprofits that want to kind of offset the cost and increase their security in some way. So it could pay for, bulletproof glass, which is necessary, like even at Chabad houses and Hillels on campus. It can pay for security cameras, a security guard. And that is a good way for our government to kind of help offset and increase the security in the spaces that our people are most vulnerable. But I think that there also needs to be, at the ADL, we believe very strongly in the freedom of speech and First Amendment rights. But there also is a responsibility of leaders to kind of speak out against this grotesque language that we see on a regular basis that's anti-Semitic. And I think that the minute that there becomes a cost to kind of carrying these ideas and speaking and acting on it, people are less likely to do it. And right now, there's not kind of a personal, political, financial cost to, playing in the anti-Semitic field. And we know that the normalization of the language will lead to vandalism. The vandalism makes it easier for there to be violent crimes. And you just kind of carry forth. And I think that, most people, I would hope in America, don't want to return to some of the darker days that we had where we saw political assassinations and people getting shot in the street for their belief system, people getting beat up just for walking down the street wearing a yarmulke, that type of stuff. So I think that we need the kind of silent majority, so to speak, to kind of start speaking up. And that includes a lot of our political leaders.
That gets me to the next question, and that, Lisa, do you believe that the political rhetoric is making things worse?
I mean, the simple answer is yes. I think that I hear things on a weekly basis now that just like shocks me, because I think that 10 years ago, the political cost for saying some of these things would be you would lose, you would lose your reelection, you would get kicked out of office, your campaign would fail, that type of thing. And that's just not the case anymore. I think that there's like a couple different categories when it comes to politics right now. There's like the actual bad actors. There's the people who deeply believe in peddling in this space that, the blame the Jews, the blame Israel type of rhetoric is, they have this kind of worldview and political view. So, this is the Tucker Carlsons and the Candace Owens of the world. And then, on the left, here in Michigan, we have Rashida Tlaib. There's a number of members of the squad that kind of made their space with some of this. There's tons of political influencers that kind of peddle in this space and get views and clicks off of this. So there's like that kind of people who are originating some of that. And then I think that there's people underneath it who maybe they don't understand that what they're saying is troubling or anti-Semitic. So this idea that you hear across the political left and in the Democratic Party now, people saying that they won't take AIPAC money. And really, to the Jewish ear, when I hear that, it sounds like they're saying they won't take Jewish money, that the Jews have an overly large influence over our politics, that they kind of run the politics with their money, which is just blatantly not true. And you don't hear people on the left saying that they won't take other types of money. Like, you don't see them saying, I'm not going to take NRA money, other types of major giant lobby groups who, give money to political campaigns. It really is that kind of Jewish organization. And we see people tracking AIPAC, but it's not even about AIPAC anymore. There's trackers that will track when people take money from like major Jewish donors, or even J Street, which is like politically an incredibly different organization than AIPAC. And so I think that is becoming a trend. You see it even like on TikTok and on Instagram, where like they're trying to be edgy and even funny in their political advertisements and posts. And there's always kind of this anti-Israel and anti-AIPAC underlying message that happens. And I think that is incredibly dangerous. And I think that, there's a cost to that, hopefully. We're not really going to see until we see the next couple of elections. But, I'm kind of horrified by the misinformation and the anti-Semitic tropes and the anti-Israel language that I see, kind of people thinking that it has to be part of their campaign. It's not like a fringe thing that only a couple of politicians are doing these days. It's a centerpiece to certain campaigns. And we saw that in a number of races here in Michigan. And we've obviously seen it across the country.
Well, sadly, it seems like it's becoming more and more mainstream. And it seems like political parties are either afraid to or reluctant to put down the extremists, as if they're fighting for every vote. And I don't know, what can I say? The next question I have is, we're in the middle of a war in the Middle East with Iran, Israel, and the United States being the main players. We, being the United States and Israel, have attacked Iran. What impact do you think this is having, if any?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that first and foremost, we should be standing with the United States military, the Israeli military, and the people of Iran. I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding of what this war is about. They're trying to compare it to Iraq or Venezuela or places that like it just is not comparable. Iran is its own situation. The Iranian regime for 40 plus years has been responsible for not only what they're doing to their own people, which I challenge people. I always say you could do a very simple Google. Just Google what it was like before the Islamic Revolution in Iran and after in terms of women. And the pictures speak 1,000 words. I mean, the pictures show before this regime took over that women were, wearing skirts and they didn't have to wear head coverings, and they were highly educated and able to go to college. And then you see afterwards, they basically are trying to erase women from any sort of, public sector. And they are beaten and kept down, and anyone that tries to speak out is arrested and put in atrocious situations in jail or killed outright. And this is a regime that has killed Americans, they've killed Israelis, they have state-sponsored terrorism all over the place, Hezbollah, Hamas. I mean, these are really the bad actors. The Islamic regime is an evil regime. This war, there's a lot of reasons that have built up to this war. They have attacked Americans, American soldier, and American soil numerous times with little to no repercussions. And these are the exact people you never would want to give nuclear weapons to. So I think that is the real facts and the reality of this. And then there's kind of what people are seeing and saying, because especially younger people don't have any sort of reference point for what Iran it was and what it's kind of become. And I find that that splinter of understanding for people who are probably 40 and younger, and therefore speaking out against the war and saying that they're doing it for freedom and justice, yet not listening to the Iranian people who desperately want freedom and justice, to be very confusing. But the other thing that we're seeing with the ADL is kind of the result of what this war is meaning in America. And we are, immediately seeing spikes on social media and in extremist spaces with anti-Semitic tropes, historical stuff about how Israel dragged America into this war, that the only reason we're doing it is because of Netanyahu, and he's kind of the puppet master, that type of language, which is, incredibly anti-Semitic. And then other reasons that, are just not true. Like the only reason that Trump did this was to cover up and take away focus from the Epstein files. I mean, these are all things that we've kind of seen spikes in chatter that we monitor through our Center on Extremism happening in extremist spaces. And the Jewish community is very much on high alert. We had just over the past week, Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens kind of spewing this hatred and this misinformation that it's the Chabad, like the Orthodox Chabad community, that is the center of why we're in Iran and the bad actors. And so then they've put, this wonderful community that goes out into places where there aren't very many Jews and holds Shabbat dinners and reaches out to students and Jewish families and provides Jewish education. Now they're under high alert and security risks because this kind of rumor that Chabad is at the center of this is kind of taken off. And so I think that what we're seeing is that whenever there is any sort of war or action that Israel is involved with or America's involved with in the Middle East, it translates to insecurity within the Jewish community here in America. And that's obviously very concerning. I spent all weekend kind of reaching out to law enforcement, talking to them, making sure that they provided extra cop cars and patrols around Jewish institutions and Chabad houses. We saw up in Toronto a number of shootings at synagogues. And this is unfortunately something that we expect to happen more of.
You know, you've articulated this beautifully. Why don't our political leaders, those in power, do a good job? I mean, really, I mean, you've covered it, and it means a lot the way you're speaking. And is law enforcement responding to you?
Yes, law enforcement is an incredible partner. We work very closely with law enforcement here. I can speak to like what we do here in Michigan. I mean, we gather police chiefs from around the state quarterly to give them trainings, to give them updates. We're in regular contact with law enforcement, especially in the areas where there's large Jewish communities. You know, we work with the Michigan State Police, we work with the FBI, we work with Homeland Security. I will say that from my experience, law enforcement takes this incredibly seriously. They understand what's happening. They understand how something that is happening across the world can impact the community here. They're very committed to protecting us and working alongside us. They have the same exact goal that the ADL has. What they want to do is stop the bad actors before they're even able to take action. And we regularly feed information to each other. If we get word of something through our Center on Extremism, we alert them. If we know that a major protest is taking place, we make sure that they're aware of it. And likewise, if they see something that's happening in their community, they reach out to us and inform us of what's happening. So we feel very strongly that law enforcement is taking this seriously. I think that the question has to be with who else needs to kind of have their eyes opened and understand this.
We're running out of time. In the final minute, what are some final thoughts? What can we do to combat anti-Semitism?
So I think the biggest thing for anyone, Jewish or not Jewish, is when it's when you see something, say something. I think that letting this stuff go, it's no longer just like a bad joke that you heard at your country club over lunch or something. I think that it's much more widespread and you kind of know what it is usually when you see it. And I think speaking out, reporting it to the ADL when you see incidents taking place. If you go straight to adl.org, you right at the top will be able to anonymously submit an anti-Semitic incident so we're aware and can take action. But I think it's also everyone's job to kind of educate yourself on this. You no longer can say, oh, well, I'm not really familiar. Oh, this is too political. I don't want to talk about this because it has to do with Israel. You know, I think that there needs to be a responsibility, adults to talk to their children about this, for people to kind of educate. We have the ability to come in and do trainings, Anti-Semitism 101 trainings. We have tons of resources on our website, but this is also something that you need to take seriously because where we see anti-Semitism, especially in the extremism landscape, we also see people with homophobic ideas. They're racist. They are anti-American. They're against a democracy. This kind of ends up spiraling into the larger community. And so it's really important to kind of support politicians who take this seriously and want to take action, to speak out when you see something, to raise your children in a way that they don't carry on or believe these tropes, and to kind of educate yourself of what younger people are seeing and experiencing, especially on social media on a daily basis.
We're out of time. Elyssa Schmier, I want to thank you so much for being my guest on Gracefully Graying. This is such an important and critical topic, and you really explained things well. I want to thank you so much. I want to thank our viewers for watching Gracefully Graying, and of course our sponsors and Bloomfield Cable for making this possible. Thank you so much, Elyssa. I appreciate it.
Thank you.